I'm Phil Hellmuth Jr. In our previous sessions, we've concentrated on the best strategies for playing before the flop. Now, however, it's time to discuss post-flop play. For many experienced players and champions, post-flop play is part of the game, and it's where the real game of poker begins. Why? Because when those three cards hit the board, there are now opportunities to outplay your opponents by betting, raising, check-raising, and bluffing that didn't exist pre-flop. Plus, most of the time, your opponent's not even going to make a pair, and so it's a good time to bluff, baby! With that in mind, we're going to give you some advice on how to outplay and avoid being outplayed by your opponents once the cards hit the felt. As I always say, play the playa! Don't play the cards, play the playa! There are four main factors, that every player should consider once the flop falls. First, and most importantly, who is the pre-flop raiser in the hand? Because action tends to check to the person with the lead in the hand, the pre-flop raiser, you can gather a lot of information about the strength of their hand based on how they react to the flop. You can also gain information from opponents who didn't raise pre-flop by their actions and reactions to the flop. The second thing to consider is your position in the hand. Like it does in pre-flop play, having position after the flop provides you with a huge advantage because it lets you gather information about the strength of your opponent's hands and adjust your play accordingly. In short, being in position makes it easier to cash in on big hands when your opponents bet into you and easier to bluff when you miss the flop. The next item to consider after the flop is the texture of the board or how coordinated the cards are with one another. Coordination, baby. Are there 2 or 3 cards to a straight? A flush? Is the board paired? An uncoordinated board is often easier to play than a coordinated one because it narrows down the range of likely hands your opponent may be holding. For example, consider what an opponent may have if they bet an uncoordinated board like Ace-9-3 Rainbow. More than likely, your opponent has flopped a pair or at best trips, versus what they may have if they bet an a coordinated board like the Jack of Spades, 10 of Spades, 4 of Diamonds, where there are straight draws and flush draws possible. Finally, the last thing to consider in post-flop play is the size of your stack and the size of your opponent's stacks. Size matters, I guess. Remember, the effective size of the pot is only as big as the smallest stack involved in the hand, assuming that there is no side pot. When you and your opponents both have large stacks, it is often easier and more profitable to draw for another card or to make a bluff than it is when you're both short stacked.